Welcome to Noah's narrative where everything feels real and something hides deeper. The taste of suspicion. Nora Calloway woke up at 5:47 in the morning with her fingers wrapped around her own throat. Welcome to Noah's narrative where everything feels real and something hides deeper. The taste of suspicion. Nora Calloway woke up at 4:47 in the morning with her fingers wrapped around her own throat. She sat upright in the narrow twin bed of her childhood bedroom, gasping like someone had just pulled her out of deep water. The pale blue ceiling stared back at her, cracked in one corner from the old house, settling, depressed, both palms flat against her sternum. Feeling her heartbeat, counting it, needing the proof that it was still moving on its own. She remembered everything: the dinner, the soup, the slow spreading numbness that started in her fingertips and crept upward like cold water rising. And she remembered Vivienne standing by the kitchen counter, watching her with the calm, distant expression of someone observing a sunset, not a person dying. But she was here, she was breathing. The clock on the nightstand read 5:48, October the 3rd. Nora swung her legs off the mattress and sat still for a moment, letting the cold hardwood floor press reality into the soles of her feet. Outside the window, a garbage truck rumbled down the street. Normal sounds, morning sounds, she followed them back to herself. She showered, dressed in a plain grey sweater and dark jeans, and walked down the hall barefoot. The house smelled like old wood and Vivienne expensive hand lotion, sweet and slightly synthetic. Their parents would arrive for Sunday dinner at 6. They gave Nora 11 hours. She stopped at the coat rack near the front door. Vivienne's cream-colored wool coat hung on the second hook, slightly damp at the shoulders from yesterday's rain. Nora stood looking at it for a long moment before sliding her hand into the left pocket. Her fingers closed around something small, cold, cylindrical. She pulled it out slowly. It was a glass vial, no bigger than a perfume sample, sealed with a dark rubber stopper. The liquid inside was perfectly clear, catching the weak morning light with an innocent shimmer that made her stomach drop. She turned it over once in her palm, twice, no label, no markings. She carried it to the kitchen sink, filled a glass of water and set the vial on the counter beside it. Then she opened the refrigerator. Vivienne had done the shopping 2 days ago. Arboreal rice on the pantry shelf, heavy cream, mushrooms, good parmesan, a wedge of soft butter. Nora recognized it immediately. Mushrooms risotto, Vivienne's specialty. The dish she made every time their parents visited. The dish she had served Nora last Sunday in a white, shallow bowl set apart from the others. Nora placed both hands flat on the countertop and breathed. She understood now what the vial was. She did not let herself fall apart over it. She pulled the stopper free, tilted the glass over the drain, watched the clear liquid disappear into the pipes, and turned the hot water on after it. Rinsed the vial, dried it with a paper towel, and set it gently beside the salt shaker on the counter, where Vivienne would see it the moment. Nora tied her hair back and began to cook. By the time she heard the soft sound of Vivienne's slippered feet on the stairs, the kitchen was full of warm, rich steam, butter browning, shallots softening, the dry scratch of rice toasting in a hot pan. Vivienne appeared in the doorway wearing a silk robe, her dark hair loose. Her eyes moved slowly across the kitchen, talking inventory, the stove, the ingredients, and then in one quick, terrible moment, the empty amber vial sitting beside the salt. Her face did not change, but something behind it did. Morning, Nora said without turning around. Thought I would take the cooking off your hands tonight. You always do so much for this family. Vivienne said nothing for 3 full seconds. I was going to make that, she said finally. Her voice was careful, controlled, too controlled. I know, Nora said. That's the sweet part. The table knows everything. Gerald and Ruth Calloway arrived at 5:50 with a bottle of red wine and an argument about parking that dissolved the moment. They stepped inside and smelled the risotto. Ruth immediately began rearranging the centerpiece. Gerald poured himself 2 fingers of scotch and lowered himself into the armchair in the sitting room, declaring his back was giving him trouble again. Nora moved through the house like a river finding its natural course, calm on the surface, moving fast underneath. Vivienne had spent the afternoon in her room. She came down at 6:05, wearing a dark green blouse and pressed trousers. Her hair swept back, she looked composed. She greeted their mother with a hug and kissed their father on the cheek. But when she passed the kitchen doorway and saw the white, shallow serving pot on the stove, her step faltered for just half a beat. Nora noticed. She noticed everything now. At 6:20, Nora carried the pot to the dining table. The smell that filled the room was extraordinary, deep and buttery, laced with the earthiness of roasted mushrooms and the sharp warmth of the good parmesan. Ruth closed her eyes briefly in pleasure. Gerald unfolded his napkin with the enthusiasm of a man who had not eaten since noon. Nora set out 4 bowls. 3 were plain with ceramic. The 4th was deep navy blue, slightly wider, placed directly in front of Vivienne's chair. It was the same bowl, the one from the last Sunday. Vivienne looked at it the way a person looks at something they recognize from a bad dream. She sat down slowly as if the chair might not hold her weight. This smells incredible, Nora, Ruth said, reaching for the ladle. Let me, Nora said, taking it gently. I know what everyone likes. She served her mother. She served her father. She added an extra spoonful to Vivienne's blue bowl, scraping it carefully along the bottom of the pot. Then she served herself last and sat down. Eat before it gets cold, Gerard said cheerfully, already halfway through his first bite. Nora, this is remarkable. You have been hiding this from us. Just trying something new, Nora said pleasantly, lifting her own fork. Vivienne had not moved. Her hands rested in her lap, wide knuckled, completely still. She was staring into the blue bowl the way someone stares into something with no bottom. Vivienne would sat, looking over. You have gone pale. Are you feeling all right? Fine, Vivienne said. The word came out flat and thin as. Eat then, Ruth said warmly. Your sister was all afternoon. Vivienne picked up her fork, nor was it trembled, tapping the ceramic rim with a small, rhythmic sound that only she seemed to hear. Gerald was talking about the drive over. Ruth was responding. Ordinary conversation floating over an extraordinary silence between the 2 sisters. Nora took a slow, deliberate bite. The flavors spread across her tongue, warm and full of life. She chewed, swallowed, and looked across the table. There is a secret ingredient, she said, holding Vivienne's gaze. Something that gives it a little extra depth. I found it this morning and thought, what a shame to waste it. The fork in Vivienne's hand stopped moving entirely. What did you put in it? Vivienne said. It was not quite a question. Her voice had dropped to something very low and very private, meant only for Nora. Everything you brought home, Nora replied softly. Ruth looked up from her bowl. Gerald paused mid-sentence. The silence that followed was the kind that arrives when something invisible and enormous moves through a room. Vivienne's chair scraped back. She stood up, her chest rising and falling in sharp, shallow pulls. I can't eat this, she said. I feel sick. You have not even tried it, Ruth said, confused. Her voice gleaming with a mother's particular worry. Sit down and eat your food, Gerard said quickly but firmly. Nora said nothing. She simply watched her sister standing at the edge of the table, perfectly balanced between the desire to flee and the knowledge that running would require explaining exactly what she was running from. Just one bite, Vivienne, Nora said very gently. It would mean a lot to me. Vivienne looked at their parents. She looked at their half-empty bowls. She looked at Nora's face, open and patient and entirely unreadable. Then she set her fork down, pressed her napkin to the table, and said, I know what you did. The room went completely still. The kitchen after midnight, the house was dark by 10. Gerald and Ruth had left an hour after dinner collapsed into silence and confusion. The goodbyes were clipped and strange, Ruth pressing her lips together the way she did when she was. Understand? Gerald put his hand briefly on Nora's shoulder without saying anything. Then the front door closed and the house settled into itself. Vivienne had gone upstairs. Nora sat at the kitchen island in the dark, both hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had gone cold. She did not turn on the lights. She listened to the refrigerator hum and waited the way a person waits when they already know the ending. At 11:40, the floorboards above her head groaned. Then again, slow, careful steps coming down the stairs, each one placed with the deliberate wit of someone who believed the house was asleep. Vivienne appeared in the kitchen doorway, a silhouette in the faint amber light bleeding in from the street. She moved to the trash can under the counter and opened the lid, reaching in without hesitation, searching through the discarded onion skins and paper towels and cream cartoons. Her breath came in fast, shallow bursts. Looking for this, Nora said. Vivienne spun around so hard she caught the edge of the countertop with her hip and gasped in pain. Her eyes found Nora in the dark, then dropped to the island where the empty amber well sat under the small reading lamp Nora had just clicked. The light made everything sharp and very small. I washed it down the drain this morning, Nora said. Her voice was conversational, almost kind. 3 drops, that was the dose, right? I figured the risotto was better without. Vivienne pressed her back flat against the cabinet. Her makeup was gone. Her expensive blouse was wrinkled. She looked like a person who had been running very hard inside a very small room for hours. Nora, she said, just the name, nothing attached to it. Why, Nora said, not angry, just tired, in a way that had no floor. Vivienne faced broke, not all at once, but in stages, the way old plaster gives way crack by crack until a whole section comes down. Tears moved silently down her face. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. That was changing the will, Vivienne said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. It told me 6 weeks ago, he said, I was irresponsible. He said, you were getting the house, the accounts, everything. I had worked my whole life to be what he wanted, and he was just giving it all to you. So you bought something off the internet, Nora said. I was not thinking clearly. You are thinking clearly enough to research the dosage. The silence between them was not angry, it was vast and exhausted. The kind that lives on the other side of something that cannot be undone. Nora stood up from the stool. She walked to the window above the sink and looked out at the dark street below, at the single working lamppost casting its circle of orange light onto the wet pavement. She stood there for a long moment. Here is what happens next, she said, still facing the window. Tomorrow morning you can call Mom and tell her you need time away. You find a therapist, a real one, outside this city. You do not come back to this house without telling me first, and you do not contact Dad about the will. And I do. Vivienne's voice was very small. Then I tell him exactly what was in the will and exactly where I found it. Nora turned around. Her face was calm, entirely composed, and somehow more frightening for it. You will believe me, you know that. Vivienne closed her eyes. A slow Shuddering breath moved through her. She nodded once. Nora crossed the kitchen, rinsed her cold mug in the sink, and dried her hands on the dish towel hanging from the oven handle. She folded it neatly over the bar. "Good night, Vivienne," she said, and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her sister standing alone in the amber light with the empty vial between them on the counter. She climbed the stairs, went to her room, and lay down on the narrow bed. The ceiling cracked in its familiar corner. Outside, the garbage truck was long gone. The street was quiet. She was alive. She had survived something that should have ended her. And tomorrow the house would still be standing, her parents would still be oblivious, and Vivienne would be packing a bag. Nora stared at the ceiling until sleep finally arrived, slow and without dreams. So thank you so much. This is the story for you, where you feel everything real and hides something deeper. So Noah's Narrative is the family channel for you, and we are bringing new stories for you which is based on the real stories. So subscribe this channel for us. Thank you so much.